is this? Oh, go for it!
Nari had 3 seconds to decide. Let the Alpha Mafia boss marry the man who planned to murder him, or kiss him in front of 200 armed criminals and expose everything he'd spent 3 years hiding. His suppressant patch was burning against his neck when he stepped forward. Bodyguards reached for their weapons. The fiancé's smile turned predatory. And Nari did the one thing an Omega bartender should never do. He put his lips on the most dangerous alpha in Seoul. Hey family, before this story begins, I want you to do something real quick. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your comments fuel these stories. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button because what happens next will absolutely wreck you. Let's dive into a BL romance that will keep you obsessed till the very end. The ballroom exploded. Shocked gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Conversations died instantly. Champagne flutes slipped from manicured hands and shattered against Italian marble. Alphas who controlled Seoul's underworld instinctively tensed, territorial pheromones spiking, hands moving toward concealed firearms. Jae-won didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, devastating in his custom black Tom Ford suit, the most lethal man in the Schiller Hotel, and suddenly the center of a scandal that would rewrite the criminal hierarchy. The kiss lasted barely 2 seconds, but in those seconds, Nari felt the full weight of his choice crush his ribs. He was going to die. He knew it with bone-deep certainty. As he pulled back, lips still brushing Jae-won's, he pressed something small and warm into the alpha's palm. His phone. Recording active. His mouth grazed Jae-won's ear, his voice barely a whisper, shaking despite every effort to stay controlled. Watch it. Don't react. Hands seized him violently. Security yanked him backward so hard his vision blurred. Someone shouted in rapid Korean. Someone else cursed in Japanese. Chairs scraped loudly as syndicate bosses stood, eyes calculating, bodies coiled, ready for war. What the hell is this? Hyun-soo snarled, his alpha pheromones flooding the room with rage and humiliation. Get that filthy Omega away from him. Nari didn't fight back. His heart was hammering so violently he thought his ribs might crack, but his eyes stayed locked on Jae-won's face. He needed to see something, anything, that told him he hadn't just destroyed his life for nothing. Jae-won's fingers closed around the phone. His expression remained unreadable, carved from ice and violence, but something flickered behind those dark eyes. Recognition. Calculation. And beneath it all, fury. The world tilted violently the second Nari's lips left Jae-won's. Hands, brutal and unforgiving, clamped around his arms like steel vices. 2 bodyguards hauled him backward with enough force to dislocate his shoulders, and Nari's feet barely scraped the floor as they dragged him away from the alpha boss. Pain shot through his biceps. His vision swam. But he didn't scream. Screaming would accomplish nothing in a room where weakness was currency and Omegas were supposed to know their place. The ballroom had descended into controlled chaos. Syndicate lieutenants were already on their feet, hands inside their suit jackets, fingers wrapped around gun grips. The air was thick, suffocating, with competing alpha pheromones. Aggression. Territoriality. Confusion. It was a chemical warfare Nari's suppressants could barely shield him from, and beneath his collar, his scent-blocking patch felt like it was melting into his skin. Mikyosio? Are you insane? One of the guards hissed in Korean, his grip tightening until Nari's bones creaked. Do you have any idea what you just did? Nari did. He knew exactly what he'd done. He'd crossed a line that didn't exist for people like him. Omegas didn't touch alphas without permission. Bartenders didn't touch mafia bosses. Nobodies didn't interrupt engagement parties attended by half of Seoul's criminal elite. And yet he'd done all 3 in the span of 2 seconds, and now he was going to pay for it with his life. But not before Jae-won heard the truth. Hyun-soo was still shrieking, his voice climbing into a register that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. Remove him. Get that thing out of here before I... Wait. The single word cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Jae-won's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When the head of the Beko syndicate spoke, the world stopped turning and listened. The bodyguards froze mid-step, their hands still locked around Nari's arms. Conversations died. Even Hyunsu's rage stuttered into shocked silence. Jae-won was staring at the phone in his palm. The small device looked almost delicate in his large hand, the screen still glowing faintly in the low light. His expression hadn't changed, still carved from marble, still unreadable, but something had shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and calculating and absolutely lethal. "Let him go," Jae-won said quietly. The guards hesitated. Protocol dictated they remove threats immediately, and an Omega who just assaulted the boss in public was definitely a threat. But Jae-won's tone left no room for interpretation. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in silk and steel. They released Nari so abruptly he stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of a table. His wrists throbbed where their fingers had dug into tendon and bone. He could feel 200 pairs of eyes burning into him, judgmental, curious, murderous. The weight of their attention was crushing. But the only gaze that mattered belonged to Jae-won. The Alpha was still watching him, and for the first time since Nari had made his catastrophic decision, their eyes truly met. Jae-won's were dark, almost black in the chandelier light, and sharp enough to dissect a man's soul in seconds. There was no softness there. No mercy. Just ruthless intelligence and the kind of control that came from ruling an empire built on blood and fear. Nari forced himself to stand straight despite the trembling in his legs. He wouldn't cower. Not now. Not after what he'd just risked. "Your fiancé," Nari said, his voice barely above a whisper but steady enough to carry across the sudden silence, "plans to kill you on your wedding night." Hyunsu's face went white, then scarlet. "What did you just?" "The proof is in your hand," Nari continued, ignoring the other Alpha completely. His focus stayed locked on Jae-won, willing him to understand, to listen before someone put a bullet between Nari's ribs. "Watch it. Don't react." For 3 endless seconds, Jae-won said nothing. His thumb moved across the phone screen almost absently, unlocking it with a swipe. The device had been recording when Nari pressed it into his palm, still warm from being hidden against Nari's chest for the past hour. Still carrying the faint digital echo of a conversation Nari had overheard in the hotel's back corridor 30 minutes ago. A conversation between Hyunsu and his beta accountant. A conversation about poison. About life insurance policies. About how much easier it would be to control the Beko syndicate once its current leader was conveniently dead. Jae-won's expression didn't change as he listened, but Nari saw it anyway, the microscopic tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible flex of his jaw. Rage, controlled and compressed into something far more dangerous than shouting. When Jae-won finally looked up from the phone, his gaze found Hyunsu first. The engaged Alpha had gone very still, his earlier fury replaced by something that looked disturbingly like calculation. Like he was already 3 steps ahead, planning how to spin this, how to discredit a nameless Omega bartender's word against his own. Then Jae-won's eyes slid back to Nari. And Nari felt it, the full weight of the Alpha's attention, sharp and assessing and absolutely merciless. He was being measured. Weighed. Judged on scales that had nothing to do with Omega designations or social hierarchies and everything to do with whether he was useful or expendable. But beneath the assessment, there was something else. Something that made Nari's suppressed instincts flare to life despite 3 years of pharmaceutical control. Recognition. Jae-won's nostrils flared slightly, so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But Nari noticed. Because he knew what it meant when an Alpha scented an Omega, even through industrial-grade suppressants. His patch had failed. Probably torn loose when the guards grabbed him. And now his natural scent was bleeding into the air like blood in water. Jasmine and steel. Soft and sharp. Contradictory and unmistakable. Interesting, Jae-won murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only Nari could hear it. The word carried layers of meaning Nari couldn't begin to unpack. "You just saved my life." He paused, his dark eyes boring into Nari's with an intensity that made breathing difficult. and signed your own death warrant. The office beneath the Schiller Hotel had no windows. No natural light. No emergency exits that Nari could see. Just concrete walls painted an institutional gray, soundproofing foam in the corners, and a single metal table bolted to the floor. The kind of room where people came to answer questions and left in very different conditions than they'd arrived. Or didn't leave at all. Nari sat in a chair that was surprisingly comfortable for what was obviously an interrogation room. His wrists weren't bound. No one had searched him for weapons. But two of J1's personal guards stood by the door with expressions carved from granite, and Nari knew with absolute certainty that if he tried to run, he'd be dead before his hand touched the doorknob. J1 stood across from him, leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and decorated with ink. A dragon, Nari realized. Black and gray scales that wound from wrist to bicep, breathing smoke and fury. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, much like the man wearing it. The Alpha hadn't spoken since they'd entered the room 5 minutes ago. He'd simply been watching Nari with those obsidian eyes, reading him the way a hunter reads prey. Calculating weak points. Escape routes. Lies. Finally, J1 pushed off the wall and placed Nari's phone on the metal table between them. The screen was still glowing. The audio file paused at the 37-second mark. "I'm going to play this," J1 said, his voice carrying the same dangerous calm it had in the ballroom. "And you're going to sit there quietly while I listen to every second of it." "Understood." Nari nodded. His throat was too dry for words. J1 pressed play. The audio quality was surprisingly clear for a phone recording. Nari had been hiding behind a service corridor near the kitchen when he'd overheard it, his phone pressed against the wall, heart hammering so loudly he'd been terrified they'd hear it through the concrete. Hyunsu's voice came through first, pitched low and conspiratorial. "The wedding is in 2 days. Everything is arranged." A second voice, bitter, nasal, unfamiliar to Nari but clearly not to J1 based on the muscle that ticked in his jaw. "And you're certain the poison won't be traced? If there's any suspicion." "There won't be," Hyunsu interrupted smoothly. "J1 has enemies everywhere. The Yakuza. The Chinese triads. Even the Russians have been making moves on our territory. When he dies at our wedding reception, everyone will assume it was a rival hit. Violent. Expected. Tragic." The beater laughed, the sound oily and self-satisfied. "And you inherit everything. The syndicate. The accounts. The connections. Very convenient." "Not convenient," Hyunsu corrected, and even through the recording, Nari could hear the smile in his voice. "Strategic. I've been planning this for 18 months. J1 thinks I'm just another alpha looking for a powerful mate, but I'm not interested in sharing power. I want it all." There was a pause, then rustling. "The poison arrives tomorrow. Odorless. Tasteless. He'll be dead within 40 minutes of ingestion, and by the time anyone realizes it wasn't a heart attack, I'll already have control of his accounts and his men. The transition will be seamless." "What about his inner circle? Kim? Park? They'll fall in line or they'll follow their boss. Either way, the Beko syndicate will be mine before the honeymoon ends." The recording clicked off. Silence flooded the room like water filling a grave. J1's expression hadn't changed, still that mask of controlled neutrality, but Nari could feel the rage radiating off him in waves. It wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold. Arctic. The kind of fury that didn't destroy buildings. It erased people from existence. "Kim Hyunsu," J1 said quietly, more to himself than to Nari. "My accountant. My beta advisor for 6 years." He looked up, and his eyes were black holes. "The man who helped me bury 3 rival bosses last year." Nari said nothing. There was nothing to say. J1 circled the table slowly, each step deliberate and predatory. He stopped directly in front of Nari's chair, close enough that Nari had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that the Alpha's scent, cedar and gunpowder and something darker, something almost feral, wrapped around Nari like smoke. "Now, Jaewon said, his voice dropping to a register that made every instinct in Nari's body scream warnings he'd spent years learning to ignore. You're going to answer my question, and you're going to answer it honestly. Because if I think you're lying to me, Omega, you won't leave this room breathing. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of Nari's chair, caging him in without touching him. Why would an unbonded Omega bartender destroy his life for mine? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and surgical. Nari could feel Jaewon's breath against his face, could see the flecks of amber buried deep in those dark irises. This close, the Alpha's presence was overwhelming, not because of pheromones or biological imperative, but because of sheer, concentrated power. Nari could lie. He could spin some story about civic duty or moral obligation. He could play the frightened Omega and hope for mercy. But Jaewon would see through it in seconds. And Nari was so tired of lying. Because I know what it's like, Nari said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, when the person beside you is the one holding the knife. Jaewon's eyes narrowed fractionally. Listening. I know what it's like to trust someone who's planning your destruction, Nari continued. To sleep next to someone who sees you as property. To smile and pretend everything's fine while they sharpen the blade. His jaw tightened. I know what that does to a person. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Not even a mafia boss I've never met. Something flickered across Jaewon's face, too fast to name, but it looked almost like recognition. And, Nari added, lifting his chin even though it brought his face inches from the Alpha's, because you're supposed to be smart enough to survive this. The most dangerous man in Seoul, they say. But you were about to marry a snake and call it love. His voice dropped, gaining an edge. I thought you deserved better than dying stupid. 4-3 heartbeats, Jaewon didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Then, slowly, a smile curved the corner of his mouth. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. But it was real. You have a sharp tongue for an Omega, Jaewon murmured. I have a sharp tongue for a person, Nari corrected. The Omega part is just biology. Jaewon's smile widened fractionally, and for the first time since entering the room, Nari felt like he might actually survive the night. Interesting, the Alpha said again, that same word from the ballroom, still carrying meanings Nari couldn't quite decode. Very interesting indeed. Jaewon didn't ask the obvious question immediately. Instead, he straightened from his position caging Nari's chair and moved to a small cabinet in the corner. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass, expensive, amber, probably worth more than Nari made in a month, and slid it across the table. Drink, Jaewon said. Not a command. An offering. Nari stared at the glass for a long moment, then picked it up. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a clean burn. Honest. Nothing like the cheap soju he'd been nursing for the past 3 years while trying to stay invisible. You said you know what it's like, Jaewon continued, pouring himself a glass and leaning against the table's edge. When the person beside you holds the knife. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving Nari's face. Tell me. It wasn't a request either. Nari set the glass down carefully, watching the amber liquid settle. He'd kept this story buried for 3 years, hidden under layers of fake names and forged employment records and pharmaceutical-grade suppressants that were slowly destroying his endocrine system. But sitting in this windowless room with a mafia boss who just had his entire world appended by a recording, Nari found he was tired of carrying it alone. His name is Minute-suk, Nari said quietly. We met 4 years ago in Busan. I was 22. He was 28. An alpha who seemed different. Gentle. Patient. He said he didn't care about traditional dynamics, that he saw me as an equal. Nari's laugh was hollow. I was stupid enough to believe him. Jaewon said nothing, but he was listening with that same surgical focus he'd applied to the recording. It started small, Nari continued. Questions about where I'd been. Who I'd talked to. He said it was because he cared. Because he loved me. The word tasted like acid. Then it was checking my phone. Following me to work. showing up unannounced. And I told myself it was romantic. That alphas were just protective. That I was lucky someone wanted me that much. His fingers tightened around the glass. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward. Said he was sorry. Said he'd been stressed. That I'd made him angry by talking to another alpha at the grocery store, and didn't I know how that looked? Didn't I understand what other men might think? J1's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The second time, he broke 2 of my ribs. Nari's voice remained steady, clinical, as if he were recounting someone else's story. Said I tried to leave. That omegas who left their alphas were asking to be claimed by force. That he was being merciful by only breaking ribs instead of. He stopped. Swallowed. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. I stayed for another 6 months after that, Nari admitted, and the shame of it still burned in his throat. Because I had nowhere to go. Because he'd isolated me from everyone I knew. Because I'd stopped taking my heat suppressants and the cycle was starting to sink to his presence, and I was terrified of what would happen if I went into heat alone in a city where any alpha could. But you did leave, J1 interrupted quietly. Eventually. Eventually, Nari confirmed. I stole money from his wallet while he was sleeping. Bought suppressants on the black market, the dangerous kind, the ones that stop heats completely but cause liver damage and bone density loss if you use them long enough. I learned to disappear. He met J1's eyes directly. I've been running for 3 years. New city every 6 months. Cash jobs only. Fake references. I suppress my scent so thoroughly that most people can't even tell I'm an omega. I've worked in factories, restaurants, convenience stores. Anywhere that didn't ask questions or run background checks. Why so? J1 asked. Because it's big enough to vanish in, Nari said. 8 million people. Hundreds of hotels. I thought I could hide here. Blend into the background. I was careful. So fucking careful. His voice cracked slightly. But Minitsuk found me anyway. 2 weeks ago, I saw him outside my apartment. Just standing there. Watching. He didn't approach. Didn't call out. Just smiled. Like he wanted me to know he could reach me whenever he decided to. J1's expression had gone very cold. And tonight? At the engagement party? I saw him in the lobby when I arrived for my shift, Nari admitted. Talking to one of your guests. Laughing. He saw me too. Made eye contact. Mouthed my name. The memory made his skin crawl. I knew what it meant. He was telling me that my time was up. That he tracked me here, to this job, to this moment. And that when he decided to take me back, no one would stop him. So you kissed me, J1 said slowly, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. In front of 200 witnesses. You exposed yourself publicly. Made yourself visible to every alpha in that room. Yes. Nari's hands were shaking now, and he couldn't stop them. Because I knew the second Minitsuk saw that, he'd escalate. He'd come for me. And maybe if I was going to die anyway, I could at least do something worthwhile first. Save someone who actually mattered instead of just running forever. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with things neither of them had words for. Then J1 did something unexpected. He set down his whiskey glass and crouched in front of Nari's chair, bringing them eye to eye. This close, without the threat of interrogation, Nari could see the man beneath the Mafia boss. Could see the scars on his knuckles. The faint mark on his neck that might have been a blade wound once. The shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many bodies buried. You're not going to die, J1 said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. Not by his hand. Not by mine. Not by anyone's. Nari wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to. You don't understand what he's like, Nari whispered. Minitsuk doesn't give up. Ever. He'll burn down this entire city to get to me. He'll. Then let him try, J1 interrupted, and there was something almost feral in his smile now. Something that reminded Nari exactly who he was dealing with. I've dealt with obsessed men before. They all bleed the same. He stood, offering Nari his hand. But first, we need to talk about what happens next. Because whether you meant to or not, Omega, you just made yourself the most interesting person in Seoul's underworld. And interesting people in my world don't survive long without protection. Nari stared at the offered hand, scarred, tattooed, stained with more blood than Nari probably wanted to know about. It was a choice. Accept it and step into whatever hell J1 was offering. Or refuse it and face Minutsook alone. It wasn't really a choice at all. Nari took his hand. They moved to a different room, this one with windows, though they overlooked nothing but the hotel's underground parking structure. J1's guards brought coffee. Real coffee, not the instant shit Nari had been drinking for 3 years. The gesture felt almost civilized, which made Nari more nervous than the interrogation had. Civilized men didn't make deals in windowless rooms. Dangerous men did. J1 sat across from him at a proper desk this time, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He'd put his suit jacket back on, transforming from the tattooed predator who'd crouched before Nari's chair into the polished alpha boss who commanded empires. But Nari could still see the dragon's tail curling around his wrist, a reminder of the violence beneath the expensive fabric. I have a proposal, J1 said without preamble. And before you answer, I want you to understand that this is a business transaction. Nothing more. Nothing less. Nari wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, grateful for something to anchor him. I'm listening. You exposed yourself tonight, J1 continued. To Minutsook. To Hyunsu. To every alpha in that ballroom who now knows an unbonded Omega had the audacity to kiss me in public. His eyes were sharp, calculating. By tomorrow morning, your face will be circulating through every criminal network in Seoul. They'll want to know who you are. Why I allowed it. What you mean to me. Nari's stomach dropped. He'd known there would be consequences, but hearing them laid out so clinically made them real in a way his panic hadn't allowed earlier. Hyunsu will come for you, J1 said. Not immediately, he's too smart for that. But he'll want revenge for the humiliation. For the exposed betrayal. And Minutsook. The alpha's expression darkened. Men like him don't accept loss. The moment he realizes you're not just some random Omega but someone who caught my attention, he'll escalate. Violently. So I'm fucked either way, Nari said flatly. That's what you're telling me. That's what I'm telling you without the solution, J1 corrected. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. But there is one. A contract bond. Nari blinked. A what? A publicly registered mating ceremony without the actual bond, J1 explained. Legal documentation. Public announcement. We go through every traditional motion, the family negotiations, the formal introduction to my organization, the ceremonial claiming, except for the bite itself. To the outside world, you become my bonded Omega. Under my protection. Under my name. Untouchable. The implications crashed through Nari's mind like falling dominoes. You want to fake mate me. I want to claim you, J1 corrected, and the distinction mattered. There's a difference. A fake mating is deception. This is strategy. Minutsook can't touch you if you're publicly mine, it would be a declaration of war against the Baekho Syndicate. And Hyunsu can't retaliate against my bonded mate without making himself look weak and petty. Nari's mind raced, analyzing angles. What do you get out of this? Reputation, J1 said simply. An unbonded Omega who outsmarted my enemies, exposed a conspiracy, and had the balls to kiss me in front of 200 armed men? That Omega choosing to bond with me sends a very specific message to my world. That I inspire loyalty. That I'm worth risking everything for. That even the smartest, most independent Omega in Seoul chose me. It was ruthlessly logical. Tactical. Everything a Mafia boss would think. And the terms? Nari asked carefully. J1 pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across. I had my lawyer draft something while you were drinking my whiskey. Read it. Nari opened the folder with shaking hands. The contract was surprisingly straightforward, written in both Korean and English legal terminology. He scanned the key points. Duration, minimum 1 year, renewable by mutual consent. No physical mating bite. No heat sharing. No biological bonding of any kind. Public appearances required as needed for organizational purposes. Separate living quarters within shared residence. Financial compensation, 50 million Korean won signing bonus, 10 million Korean won's monthly stipend. Protection guarantee, full security detail. Legal representation. Medical coverage. Termination clause, either party may dissolve with 30 days notice, provided external threats have been neutralized. Nari looked up. This is insane. This is survival, J1 countered. For both of us. You get protection from two men who want to destroy you. I get political capital and the satisfaction of watching Hyun-soo lose everything. His smile was sharp. And we both get to flip our middle fingers at a world that thinks omegas should be quiet and alphas should marry for power instead of principle. There's no emotion clause, Nari observed, his finger tracing the contract's margins. No, we agree not to catch feelings disclaimer. Because we're adults, J1 said. Not teenagers writing fanfiction. Emotions happen or they don't. The contract covers behavior, not biology. He paused. But for the record, I'm not looking for love, Nari. I'm looking for a strategic advantage that happens to keep you alive. If you can live with that, sign. Nari stared at the contract. At the numbers that represented more money than he'd seen in 3 years combined. At the protection clause that promised safety he'd stopped believing existed. At the termination option that meant this wasn't forever, just long enough to survive. It was a gamble. But then again, so was kissing a mafia boss in front of 200 witnesses. So was running for 3 years with poisonous suppressants destroying his body from the inside. So was everything Nari had done since the night he'd stolen money from Minutsu's wallet and disappeared into the dark. He'd been gambling his entire life. At least this time, the odds were visible. I want one addition, Nari said. J1 raised an eyebrow. Name it. If Minutsu comes for me, I don't want him arrested or scared off. I want him gone. Permanently. Nari's voice didn't waver. I've spent 3 years running. I won't spend another 3 looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to find me again. If I'm signing this, if I'm putting my life in your hands, I need to know he won't ever touch me again. Something flickered in J1's eyes. Approval, maybe. Or recognition of a kindred ruthlessness. Done, J1 said simply. He pulled a pen from his jacket and made a handwritten notation at the bottom of the contract. Upon credible threat from Minutsu, permanent termination authorized. He initialed it, then slid the pen across to Nari. Anything else? Nari shook his head. His hand was steadier than it had any right to be as he signed his name at the bottom of the contract. Park Nari. His real name. The one Minutsu had tried to erase. The one he was reclaiming. J1 signed opposite him, his signature a slash of black ink that looked like a blade stroke. Then he stood and extended his hand across the desk. Welcome to the Bekho Syndicate, Omega, he said. Try not to kiss anyone else at formal events. It's hell on my reputation. Despite everything, despite the danger and the insanity and the fact that he just legally bound himself to a mafia boss, Nari laughed. It came out rough and slightly hysterical, but it was real. He shook J1's hand, feeling the strength in those scarred fingers, and wondered if he'd just made the smartest decision of his life or signed his own death warrant in expensive ink. Time would tell. The private dining room at Gangnam's most exclusive restaurant was designed for men who controlled Seoul from the shadows. No windows. Soundproofed walls. A single entrance guarded by men with guns hidden beneath tailored suits. 12 seats around a table set with baccarat crystal and crystal silverware. Every chair occupied by an alpha who'd killed to earn their place. And Nari, the only Omega in the room, sitting at J1's right hand like he belonged there. The contract bond announcement had gone public 48 hours ago. Long enough for the news to circulate through every criminal network in the city. Long enough for reactions to calcify into policy. Short enough that everyone was still measuring, still calculating what this meant for the delicate power structure that kept Seoul's underworld from eating itself alive. Nari had dressed carefully for this. A black silk shirt that covered his neck completely, no accidental scent leakage, no suggestion of availability. Tailored slacks that were elegant without being provocative. His suppressant patch was fresh, triple layered, strong enough to mask his scent from everyone except maybe J1, who seemed to notice everything. He looked expensive. Controlled. Untouchable. Exactly the image they'd agreed upon. So this is the famous Omega, said Choi Dae-jung, head of the Gwangju faction, his eyes dragging over Nari with the subtlety of a butcher appraising meat. The one who made such a scene at the engagement party. Quite brave. Or quite stupid. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Several alphas shifted in their seats, hands moving closer to concealed weapons. Testing moments like this were when wars started in their world, when disrespect met retaliation and blood-soaked expensive carpets. But J1 didn't move. Didn't bristle. He simply took a slow sip of his whiskey, utterly relaxed, and Nari understood. This was his test. Not J1's. The alpha boss was giving him space to prove he wasn't just decoration. Wasn't just some frightened Omega hiding behind a powerful mate. Nari met Choi's eyes directly, a breach of Omega etiquette that made the man's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. Bravery and stupidity often look identical in the moment, Nari said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. The difference only becomes clear in the results. I'm still breathing. J1's former fiancé is currently explaining himself to his family about why their alliance fell through. So I suppose we know which one it was. Someone choked on their drink. Another alpha, Park, from the Incheon territory, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Choi's expression darkened. You have a sharp tongue for someone who should be serving drinks, not sitting at the table. And you have outdated opinions for someone who supposedly runs a modern organization, Nari countered smoothly. But I suppose we all have our flaws. At least mine doesn't include underestimating people based on their designation. The silence that followed was electric. Deadly. Nari could feel multiple alpha gazes burning into him, measuring him, recalculating everything they'd assumed about J1's bonded Omega. This was the moment. Either they'd respect him as an extension of J1's power, or they'd see him as weakness to exploit. Then J1 laughed. It wasn't the polite chuckle of diplomatic negotiation. It was genuine, rich and real and surprised. The sound cut through the tension like a blade through silk, and Nari turned to see something he hadn't witnessed before, J1 actually smiling. Not the dangerous curve of his mouth that preceded violence. Not the calculated expression he wore for business. But a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look almost human. I like him, announced Kim Minute-ho, the eldest alpha at the table and unofficial mediator of territorial disputes. His weathered face creased with amusement. J1, you chose well. An Omega with a spine is worth 10 who simper and cry. I didn't choose him for his spine, J1 said, his hand moving to rest on the back of Nari's chair, a possessive gesture that was pure theater but felt startlingly real. I chose him because he's smarter than half the men in this room and brave enough to prove it. The spine is just a bonus. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The alphas who'd been watching Nari with predatory assessment now regarded him with something closer to wary respect. He wasn't prey anymore. He was J1's weapon, sharp and dangerous and not to be handled carelessly. Choi cleared his throat, his earlier aggression dissolving into careful neutrality. My apologies, Nari-sai. I meant no disrespect. The honorific was telling. Nari inclined his head graciously, accepting the unspoken surrender. The rest of the dinner proceeded smoothly. Business was discussed, territory negotiations, profit shares, the ongoing problem with Russian encroachment on the port operations. Nari didn't speak unless addressed, but when he did, his observations were sharp and his questions sharper. He'd spent 3 years watching people from the shadows, learning to read power dynamics and predict violence. Turns out those skills translated well to syndicate politics. By the time dessert arrived, some elaborate French thing Nari couldn't pronounce, the whispers had already started. He could see it in the way the alphas leaned toward each other between courses, in the sidelong glances they threw his direction when they thought he wasn't looking. This Omega is different. Did you hear what he said to Choi? Jaewon's actually smiling. When does he ever smile? Smart move, claiming him publicly. Sends a message. And beneath it all, the unspoken truth that made Nari's pulse quicken. This changes things. Later, in the car back to Jaewon's penthouse, the Alpha poured them both whiskey from the backseat bar. The privacy screen was up, giving them temporary isolation from the driver and guards in front. You did well tonight, Jaewon said, handing Nari a glass. Better than expected, honestly. Choi's been looking for weaknesses to exploit for months. You turned yourself into a strength instead. Nari took the whiskey but didn't drink immediately. He was watching Jaewon's reflection in the tinted window, the city lights streaming past them like falling stars. I realized something tonight, Nari admitted quietly. What's that? Standing beside you, Nari paused, searching for the right words. It doesn't feel like hiding. Or surviving. Or any of the things I've been doing for 3 years. What does it feel like? Jaewon asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested the answer mattered more than casual curiosity. Nari met his eyes in the window's reflection. Like wielding power for the first time. Like I'm not just reacting to the world anymore. Like I'm shaping it. Jaewon was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly Nari almost missed it, good. That's exactly what I wanted you to feel. And Nari realized with a jolt of something that felt dangerously close to belonging that this contract, this fake bond, this strategic arrangement, was becoming something neither of them had planned for. Something real. The bullet missed Nari's head by 3 inches. He felt the displacement of air, heard the whisper of death passing his ear, and then the world exploded into chaos. Jaewon's guards returned fire immediately, the penthouse's reinforced windows shattering into crystalline rain. Someone tackled Nari to the floor, one of the security team, and he tasted marble and copper as his lips split against imported Italian tile. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. 3 shooters on the building across the street. Professional. Coordinated. And targeting Nari specifically, based on the angle of trajectory the forensics team would later confirm. Hyunsu's revenge, delivered with surgical precision. When the smoke cleared and the bodies were being removed, Jaewon crouched beside where Nari still lay on the floor, shaking so violently his teeth rattled. The Alpha's hands were gentle but firm as he checked Nari for injuries, fingers ghosting over ribs and skull, looking for blood that thankfully wasn't there. You're moving, Jaewon said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a tone that expected no argument. Into my wing. Tonight. Nari wanted to protest. The contract specified separate quarters. Professional distance. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking and there was broken glass in his hair and he just watched 3 men die because Hyunsu wanted him dead for daring to expose the truth. Okay, he whispered. Jaewon's private wing occupied the entire top floor of the penthouse. Nari had never been inside before, the contract hadn't required it. But now, being walked through rooms that smelled like cedar and gunpowder and Jaewon's distinct alpha scent, Nari felt like he was crossing a threshold that had nothing to do with architecture. The guest room Jaewon assigned him was larger than any apartment Nari had rented in 3 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows with bulletproof glass. A bed that could fit 4 people. An ensuite bathroom with a soaking tub that looked like something from a luxury spa. But what caught Nari's attention was the door connecting to what he assumed was Jaewon's bedroom. It locks from your side, Jaewon said, following his gaze. But in emergencies, I can override it. For your safety, not for, he paused. You understand? Nari nodded. He understood. This wasn't about control. It was about survival. That night, Nari couldn't sleep. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow looked like an assassin. He'd faced death before, Minutsuke's fists, his own desperate escapes, but this was different. This was being hunted by professionals. By men who killed for money and precision rather than obsession. Around 3 a.m., he felt it. The first warning spike of heat. No. Not now. Not here. His suppressants weren't due to fail for another month. He'd been so careful, so precise with his dosing. But stress could trigger early onset, and apparently nearly dying qualified as stress. The pharmaceutical blockade he'd maintained for 3 years was cracking, and his biology was screaming to break free. Nari barely made it to the bathroom before his scent exploded. Jasmine and steel, but now with something underneath, something sweet and desperate and unmistakably omega in heat. The scent blocker patches on his neck bubbled and peeled away, useless against the chemical onslaught. His skin felt too tight. His body temperature spiked. And the need, God, the need that clawed through his stomach, was terrifying in its intensity. He locked the bedroom door. Then the bathroom door. Then collapsed against the tile floor, biting his fist to keep from crying out as the first wave hit him. Through the haze of heat, Nari heard movement in the hallway. Footsteps. Then Jaewon's voice, rough with concern and something that might have been restraint. Nari. Talk to me. Don't, Nari gasped, his voice wrecked. Don't come in. Please. The suppressants failed. I'm in preheat and I can't. Silence. Then, I'm not coming in. But I'm not leaving either. Jaewon, you can't. The alpha pheromones would drive him insane. Being this close to an unmated omega in heat went against every biological imperative. You need to go. Get distance. It's not in the contract. Fuck the contract. Jaewon's voice was steady despite the strain Nari could hear underneath. I'm staying outside this door until it passes. No one gets to you. Not my men. Not anyone. Understand? Nari wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him to leave, to protect himself from the torture of an omega's heat scent without the ability to act on instinct. But another wave hit him and all he could do was curl tighter against the cold tile, grateful and guilty in equal measure. The heat lasted 36 hours. 36 hours of Nari locked in that room, his body betraying him with needs he refused to voice. 36 hours of Jaewon sitting outside the door, occasionally speaking, telling Nari about his day, about syndicate business, about nothing important. Just his voice, grounding Nari when the biological storm threatened to sweep him away completely. The guards tried to approach once. Nari heard it through his haze, footsteps, concerned voices asking if the boss needed relief, if he should step away for his own sanity. Jaewon's response was a growl that made Nari's omega hindbrain sit up and take notice despite everything. Anyone who comes within 10 feet of this door loses their throat. Spread the word. No one approached again. When the heat finally broke, Nari emerged shaky and dehydrated, wearing one of Jaewon's shirts he'd found in the closet because his own clothes were destroyed. He unlocked the bedroom door with trembling fingers, expecting to find the hallway empty. Expecting Jaewon to have given up and left hours ago. Instead, he found the alpha asleep against the doorframe. Jaewon had lasted the entire 36 hours. His hair was disheveled, dark circles carved beneath his eyes, and there were crescent-shaped marks on his palms where his nails had dug in hard enough to draw blood. The control it must have taken, sitting outside a door, breathing in heat pheromones designed by nature to drive alphas into claiming frenzy, and choosing to protect rather than possess, was staggering. Nari stood there for a long moment, looking down at this dangerous man who turned himself into a shield. Who'd sat vigil like a knight from stories Nari had stopped believing in. Who'd honored every word of their contract even when biology screamed at him to break it. The contract suddenly felt like the thinnest paper. And what was developing between them felt permanent as scars. Jaewon, Nari whispered, crouching down. Wake up. The Alpha's eyes opened immediately, alert despite exhaustion. They locked on Nari, scanning for threats, for problems, for anything that needed fixing. You stayed, Nari said, his voice cracking. I told you I would. Jaewon's voice was hoarse, wrecked from hours of fighting his own instincts. I keep my promises. And Nari realized, with the clarity of someone who just survived their worst nightmare, that this wasn't about contracts anymore. It never really had been. The package arrived at 2 a.m., delivered by a terrified courier who dropped it on the penthouse lobby desk and ran before security could question him. By the time it reached Jaewon's hands, Nari was already awake, his Omega instincts screaming warnings he didn't yet understand. The box was small. Expensive. Wrapped in black silk with a red ribbon like a perverse gift. And it smelled wrong. Like copper and fear and something that made Nari's stomach turn before Jaewon even opened it. Inside was a severed finger. Small. Young. Still wearing a silver ring Nari had bought for his brother's 18th birthday. And a phone. Already playing a video. Nari's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped it. On the screen, Taeyang was tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. His face was bruised, left eye swollen shut, and there was blood, so much blood, running from where his finger used to be. He was crying, confused, terrified. A 20-year-old university student who'd been studying for midterms 12 hours ago and now was living Nari's worst nightmare. Then Minute-suk stepped into frame. He looked exactly as Nari remembered. Handsome in a way that had once made Nari's heart race. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that hid monsters. His alpha pheromones were practically bleeding through the video, aggressive and possessive and utterly unhinged. Hello, Naria, Minute-suk said, his voice a mockery of affection. Did you miss me? I certainly missed you. 3 years is a long time to wait for what belongs to me. He ran a hand through Taeyang's hair, making the boy flinch. Your little brother is very brave. He wouldn't tell me where you were. Kept insisting he hadn't seen you in years. Doesn't even know you're in Seoul, does he? Minute-suk's laugh was poisonous. You hid so well, Nari. Changed your life. Became invisible. And then you kissed a mafia boss on national television and destroyed all that careful work. On screen, Minute-suk pulled out a knife. The blade caught the dim warehouse light, and Taeyang's sobbing intensified. Here's what's going to happen, Minute-suk continued, his tone conversational despite the weapon in his hand. You're going to come to me. Alone. No mafia boyfriend. No guards. No clever plans. Just you, walking through the door like the obedient Omega you were always meant to be. He pressed the knife against Taeyang's throat, not cutting, just threatening. You have 6 hours. The address is in the box. If you're not here, if you bring anyone, if I even smell another alpha within a kilometer of this location, I'll teach your little brother everything you refuse to learn. Starting with what happens to Omegas who forget their place. The video ended. The phone screen went black, reflecting Nari's shattered expression. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Nari stood frozen, his mind cycling through 3 years of running, of hiding, of believing he could protect the people he loved by staying away from them. And it had all been for nothing. Minute-suk had found the one weapon that would bring Nari to his knees. Then Nari was moving. Grabbing his jacket. Checking the address on the slip of paper tucked beneath Taeyang's finger. His hands were steady now, locked into a terrible calm that came from knowing exactly what he had to do. Call a car, Nari said to the nearest guard. I need to. Jaewon's hand closed around his wrist. Not rough. Not painful. But immovable as iron. No, the Alpha said simply. He is my brother. Nari's voice cracked on the last word. Taeyang doesn't know anything. Doesn't understand why this is happening. He's just a kid who, the words caught in his throat. I have to go. I don't have a choice. You have a choice, Jaewon said, his grip tightening fractionally. You can walk into that warehouse and let a psychopath destroy you both. Or you can trust me to handle this the right way. The right way. Nari yanked against Jaewon's hold, rage and terror bleeding into his voice. He has a knife to my brother's throat. There is no right way. There's only me doing what he wants before Taeyang loses more than a finger. You don't negotiate with men like him, Jaewon said, and his voice had gone cold. Lethal. The voice of a man who'd built an empire on understanding violence. You don't give them what they want and hope they'll show mercy. Men like Minute-suk don't have mercy. They have obsession. And the second you walk through that door, he won't let either of you leave alive. So what? Nari's laugh was bitter, broken. I let Taeyang die because I'm too scared to face Minute-suk? Let my brother pay for my choices. No. Jaewon pulled Nari closer, forcing eye contact. You let me do what I'm good at. You let me end this permanently. He said to come alone. And you think he's going to honor that? Jaewon's expression was almost pitying. Nari, the moment you arrive, he'll hurt you in front of your brother to break you both. He'll make Taeyang watch while he stopped, jaw clenching. This isn't about getting your brother back safely. It's about destroying everything you've built. Everything you've become. He wants the Omega who ran from him 3 years ago, not the one who stands beside me now. Nari's knees threatened to give out. Because Jaewon was right. God, he was right. Minute-suk didn't want reunion. He wanted obliteration. Then what do I do? Nari whispered. How do I save him? Jaewon released Nari's wrist only to cup his face with both hands, forcing Nari to focus through the panic. You trust me. You let me take my team. We have 6 hours to plan a tactical extraction. I've done this before. Hostage rescue is how I built half my reputation. We get Taeyang out. And we make sure Minute-suk never touches another Omega again. And if you're wrong? Nari's voice broke. If Taeyang dies because we didn't. He won't. Jaewon's certainty was absolute. I swear it on everything I've built. Your brother will come home safe. But you have to let me handle this my way. You have to trust that I'm dangerous for the right reasons. Nari looked into those dark eyes and saw the truth. Jaewon wasn't promising safety or clean hands. He was promising war. Calculated, brutal, efficient war against a man who deserved no quarter. And Nari, who'd spent 3 years running from violence, made a choice. End him, Nari said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. Make sure Minute-suk never hurts anyone again. Jaewon's smile was sharp as broken glass. Already planning on it. The warehouse district at 4 a.m. was a graveyard of industrial ambition. Rusted shipping containers. Broken concrete. Shadows that swallowed sound. Jaewon's team moved through it like smoke, 12 men trained in extraction, armed with weapons that didn't appear on any legal registry, wearing communications equipment that cost more than most people's cars. Nari watched from the tactical van 3 blocks away, every camera feed displayed on screens that showed angles of the target warehouse. His heart was a war drum against his ribs. Beside him, Jaewon's second-in-command Park Ji-hoon monitored thermal imaging that showed 2 heat signatures inside. One large, pacing. One small, stationary. Minute-suk and Taeyang. Alpha team in position, crackled through the comms. Awaiting green light. Jaewon's voice came through, cold and controlled. He'd gone in personally, against every tactical recommendation, against protocol. But this wasn't about protocol. This was about sending a message that would echo through Seoul's underworld. No one touched what was his. Nari stays in the van, Jaewon had said before leaving, his hand briefly touching Nari's face. No matter what you hear. No matter what happens. You stay here where it's safe. Now, watching the feeds, Nari understood why. The warehouse door exploded inward. Flashbang grenades turned night into temporary sun, disorienting but not deadly. Jaewon's team poured through the breach with practiced efficiency, 2 men immediately securing Taeyang, cutting his bonds, checking vitals. The boy was alive. Conscious. terrified but breathing. Minute-suk had been ready. He'd anticipated the rescue, of course he had. He'd probably counted on it. Because this wasn't about Taeyang. It had never been about Taeyang. "Tell Nari," Minute-suk shouted, his voice carrying through the chaos, "that I'm waiting. Tell him if he wants his brother to leave here whole, he comes to me. Now." On screen, Nari watched Jaewon step into the light. The Alpha moved with lethal grace, gun holstered, hands loose at his sides. This close, through the camera feed, Nari could see the absolute lack of fear in Jaewon's expression. Only cold calculation and something that looked like anticipation. "Nari isn't coming," Jaewon said. "But I'm here. And that's going to be enough." Minute-suk laughed. He'd been handsome once, Nari remembered that. But 3 years of obsession had carved something ugly into his features. Made him monstrous. The Mafia boyfriend. Here to play hero. He pulled a small vial from his pocket, crushed it under his boot. "Let's see how heroic you feel when your Omega is screaming for an alpha. Any alpha." The scent hit the warehouse like a biological weapon. Synthetic heat pheromones. Military grade. The kind used in interrogations and black sites. Designed to trigger every Omega within a 100-meter radius into force presenting, a violation of biology so complete it could break minds. In the van, Nari gasped as his body reacted. His suppressants fought the chemical assault, but they were losing. Heat spiked through his core. His scent glands activated involuntarily. Every Omega instinct screamed at him to present, to submit, to find the nearest alpha and... No. Nari bit down hard on his own hand, using pain to anchor himself. He'd survived Minute-suk's fists. Survived 3 years of running. Survived his own biology trying to betray him during heat. He wouldn't let chemicals reduce him to instinct. Wouldn't let Minute-suk win by turning him into what the Alpha had always believed Omegas were, helpless, ruled by biology, less than human. Through the haze, Nari watched the screen. Watched Jaewon's nostrils flare as Nari's scent reached him even through distance and concrete. Watched the Alpha's pupils dilate with the biological imperative to go to his Omega, to claim, to protect. Watched Jaewon ignore every screaming instinct and focus solely on Minute-suk. "That all you've got?" Jaewon's voice was steady. Controlled. Chemical parlor tricks? No wonder Nari ran from you. You never understood that Omegas aren't biology to be controlled. They're people to be respected. Minute-suk snarled and attacked. The fight was brutal. Minute-suk fought like a man with nothing to lose, wild, aggressive, fueled by 3 years of festering obsession. But Jaewon fought like a man who'd built an empire on controlled violence. Every move was efficient. Economical. Designed not to wound but to end. When Minute-suk pulled a knife, the same one he'd used on Taeyang, Jaewon broke his wrist so completely the bone pierced skin. The blade clattered across concrete. Minute-suk howled, clutching his ruined hand, and Jaewon finally let his carefully maintained control slip. "You broke his ribs," Jaewon said, his voice conversational as he advanced. "Made him run for 3 years. Terrorized him. Hunted him. Cut off a kid's finger to lure him back." Each statement was punctuated by methodical violence. You tried to reduce an incredible person to property. Minute-suk was on the ground now, bleeding, broken. But still sneering. "He's an Omega. That's what they are for. And when I heal, when I come back. You won't." Jaewon pulled his gun in one smooth motion. "Because predators like you don't get second chances in my world." The gunshot was clean. Professional. Final. Nari watched Minute-suk's body go still on the screen, and felt something inside himself go still too. The fear he'd carried for 3 years. The looking over his shoulder. The nightmare of hands around his throat and fists in his ribs. All of it, ended by a single bullet and an Alpha who kept his promises. 15 minutes later, Taeyang was in the van, wrapped in thermal blankets, being checked by a medic. He was in shock, traumatized but physically stable. He'd heal. Eventually, with therapy in time and the knowledge that his older brother had moved heaven and hell to save him. And Nari, who'd held himself together through everything, finally shattered. It started as trembling. Then his knees gave out. Then the sobs came, great, gasping, impossible to control sounds that ripped from his chest like something vital being torn free. 3 years of terror. 3 years of running. 3 years of believing he'd never be safe. Gone. Ended. Over. Jaewon caught him before he hit the van floor. Strong arms wrapped around Nari's shaking body, pulling him against a chest that smelled like gunpowder and blood and safety. The Alpha said nothing, just held him through it, one hand in Nari's hair, the other pressed against his spine. When Nari could finally breathe again, when the sobs had quieted to shudders, he heard Jaewon's voice. Low. Certain. Absolute. You're safe now. I swear it. And for the first time in 3 years, Nari believed it. 3 weeks after Minutsook's death, Nari stood in Jaewon's office watching Seoul spread beneath him like a circuit board of light and ambition. Taeyang was safe, recovering in a private facility where trauma specialists were helping him process everything. The boy had questions, deserved answers, and Nari was slowly giving them. Building a relationship that had been severed by necessity and fear. Hyunsu was gone too. Not dead, Jaewon had been strategic about that. The former fiancé had been exposed, his conspiracy revealed to every family who mattered, his reputation destroyed more completely than a bullet ever could. He'd fled to Japan, disgraced and powerless. A ghost of the Alpha who'd thought he could steal an empire. And the contract that had bound Nari to Jaewon sat on the desk between them, all 12 pages of legal terminology and protective clauses and careful boundaries. Jaewon picked it up without ceremony. And tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was shockingly loud in the quiet office. Nari turned from the window, his heart suddenly hammering for reasons he couldn't name. What are you doing? His voice came out steadier than he felt. Jaewon continued tearing, reducing the contract to strips, then scraps, letting the pieces fall to his desk like snow. Ending a fiction, he said simply. This, he gestured at the destroyed document, was never about protection anymore. Maybe it was, in the beginning. A strategic arrangement. Mutual benefit. Clean terms. He looked up, and Nari saw something in those dark eyes he'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Raw and undefended. But I don't want a contract bond, Nari. I don't want separate quarters and professional distance and monthly stipends. I don't want fake. Jaewon moved around the desk, closing the distance between them until Nari could count his heartbeats in the pulse at his throat. I want you. Your fire. Your mind. The way you refuse to bow even when every instinct tells you to submit. The way you stood up to Choi. The way you laughed in my car after the syndicate dinner. The way you've turned my carefully controlled empire into something that feels like. He stopped. Swallowed. The most dangerous man in Seoul, rendered speechless by an Omega who'd kissed him to save his life and somehow saved both of them in the process. Home? Jaewon finished quietly. You make it feel like home. Nari's breath caught. 3 years of running had taught him to read deception in every gesture, every word. To see manipulation in kindness and possession disguised as protection. But looking at Jaewon now, at this Alpha who'd sat outside a locked door for 36 hours, who'd eliminated threats without being asked, who'd never once demanded submission or obedience, Nari saw only truth. You never tried to control me, Nari said, the realization hitting him with the weight of revelation. Even when you could have. When my heat failed and I was vulnerable. When Minutsook triggered those pheromones and biology was screaming at you. When the contract would have let you demand anything. His voice cracked slightly. You've only ever stood beside me. Never over me. Because that's not what partnership is, Jaewon said. And I don't want an Omega who submits because biology or contracts or fear tell him to. I want, he reached out, his hand hovering near Nari's face, asking permission. I want the man who had the audacity to kiss a Mafia boss. Who told Choi he had outdated opinions. who chose to trust me with his brother's life even when every instinct screamed not to. Nari closed the distance, pressing his cheek into J1's palm. The touch was electric. Grounding. Real in a way nothing had been for 3 years. I spent so long believing love meant captivity, Nari admitted. That bonding meant losing myself. Becoming property. Minitsuk taught me that. Reinforced it with every bruise, every broken rib, every time he said he loved me while destroying who I was. This isn't that, J1 said fiercely. This will never be that. I know. And Nari did. He knew it in his bones, in the parts of himself that Minitsuk had tried to break and failed. So what are you asking me, J1? Without contracts or protection clauses or strategic arrangements. What do you want? J1's smile was soft, genuine, beautiful in its simplicity. I want you to be my mate. Really. Not for show or safety or syndicate politics. I want to wake up next to you and know it's because you chose to be there, not because a contract obligated it. I want to build something real. He paused, his hand moving from Nari's face to rest over his heart. And I want to give you the future you deserve. I'm already working with lawyers, legitimizing the business holdings, transitioning away from the criminal operations. It'll take years, but I'm building something clean. Something where you can stand beside me as an equal partner, not hidden in shadows. Nari's eyes widened. You're leaving the syndicate. I'm evolving it, J1 corrected. Real estate. Technology investments. Security consultation. All the power, none of the bodies. His expression turned wry. Turns out having an Omega who makes me want to be better is incredibly motivating. That's, Nari laughed, the sound surprised and delighted and slightly hysterical. That's insane. You're the head of the Bekho syndicate. You can't just. I can do whatever I want, J1 interrupted gently. That's what power means. And I want to use it to build a life where you're not the Mafia boss's Omega. Where you're Park Nari, my partner, my equal, the person who changed everything. Nari looked at this alpha, this dangerous, brilliant, surprisingly soft-hearted man, and felt something slot into place in his chest. Like a bone that had been broken for years finally healing properly. Yes, Nari said simply. I want that. I want you. Really. The kiss that followed was nothing like their first. No audience. No desperation. No recording pressed into palms or whispered warnings. Just two people choosing each other with clear eyes and whole hearts. When they finally pulled apart, J1's forehead rested against Nari's, both of them breathing hard. The mating bite, J1 said quietly. I won't do it unless you're completely certain. We can wait. Years, if you need. There's no rush. But Nari was certain. For the first time in 3 years, he was absolutely certain. Now, he said. I want it now. Not because I'm scared or desperate or running out of options. Because I choose you. Because I choose this. J1's eyes darkened with something that was desire and devotion and profound respect all tangled together. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. They moved to J1's private quarters, not the guest room where Nari had weathered his heat, but the Alpha's actual bedroom. Personal. Intimate. A space J1 had kept private even during their contract. When J1's teeth finally pressed against Nari's mating gland, when the bite broke skin and biology and destiny tangled into something permanent, Nari felt no fear. No loss of self. No captivity. Instead, he felt seen. Completely. The parts of himself he'd spent 3 years hiding, his strength, his sharpness, his refusal to submit, weren't things to be suppressed or controlled. They were things J1 cherished. Desired. Chose. The bond settled into Nari's consciousness like coming home. He could feel J1's emotions now, the fierce protectiveness, the genuine love, the absolute certainty that Nari was his equal in every way that mattered. And when Nari bit back, claiming J1 with the same permanence and choice, He felt the Alpha's joy and relief and something that felt suspiciously like wonder. Later, tangled together in sheets that smelled like both of them, Nari traced the fresh bite mark on J1's neck. His Omega instincts were purring with satisfaction, but more importantly, his human heart was at peace. I was wrong, Nari said quietly. About what? Being bonded to the right Alpha. Nari met J1's eyes, seeing his own reflection there, not diminished, not controlled, but amplified. It doesn't mean losing myself. It means finally being seen. All of me. Even the parts that aren't convenient or submissive or traditionally Omega. J1 pulled him closer, pressing a kiss to his temple. Especially those parts. Those are my favorite. And Nari, who'd spent 3 years running from love because he'd thought it meant captivity, discovered that with the right person, love meant freedom. The freedom to be dangerous and soft. Strong and vulnerable. An Omega who'd kissed a Mafia boss and ended up changing both their worlds.